It's a biological fact that no child is ever born in the wrong body, but children are being indoctrinated from their early years to deny God's design. Welcome to Freedom Alive. Dr. Miriam Grossman is board certified in child, adolescent, and adult psychiatry. She's been treating patients for 45 years and specifically fighting gender ideology for over a decade. In fact, before gender ideology was on anyone's radar, she warned parents about its dangers in her 2009 book, You're Teaching My Child What? Dr. Grossman also has been vocal about her medical colleagues who have bought into this horrendous industry. And it is an industry. I'm blessed again to be joined by our co-host, Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel. And Matt, as radical activists, try and confuse our children with this gender madness. The incredible grief and trauma also affects parents and family members who now find themselves shunned and alienated if they even refuse to affirm the child's delusion. Dr. Grossman works to equip parents with the ammunition to avoid, or if necessary, fight what many families describe as the most difficult challenge of their lives.
Yes, it's really an assault on our children, especially when you're telling children that they can choose their gender, whether they can be opposite, male, female, combination of both, neither, asexual, pansexual, whatever it might be. It is a real assault on our children, and it ultimately is very destructive. Unfortunately, within the psychology and psychiatric movement of the industry as a whole, it has bought into this lie, and it's part of the problem as well. So Dr. Miriam Grossman is a really strong voice coming from that particular area of specialty, and there are many, many more like her out there, but they're going against streams of this inertia by these psychology organizations, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, that are really pushing this LGBTQ agenda. It's very destructive. Some of it is also destructive in the context of these laws that want to ban any counsel that a trained psychiatrist or counselor can give to someone who is struggling with these unwanted same-sex attractions, behaviors, or gender identity. We have challenged those in a number of different cases, and we've won, but there's still a number of those laws that are on the books around the country. These are laws that literally trap children into a very destructive agenda.
Thank you. Thank you. We cannot wait to bring this to you. Our Freedom Alert is next.
The abortion pill is never safe for women. I'm Matt Staver, host of Freedom Alive. Mifepristone, taken in combination with misoprostol, forms the two-drug regimen that causes a chemical abortion. Some people in medicine, law, and politics claim that mifepristone is safer than Tylenol. However, scientific studies prove otherwise. For example, a Finnish study of 42,600 women found that 20% of women who have a chemical abortion experience a negative adverse event. The study also found that women are 4 times more likely to suffer severe complications than from surgical abortions. The most common of those were hemorrhage and incomplete abortion. Comparing chemical abortion drugs to Tylenol is offensive and misleading. It's very obvious that there's a deliberate strategy to misinform people, and the science clearly proves that chemical abortions are devastatingly harmful to women.
Up next, Matt's interview with Dr. Miriam Grossman.
My very special guest is Dr. Miriam Grossman, and she is a board-certified psychiatrist in adolescent and adult psychiatry and a specialist in this particular area that we want to talk about. Welcome to Freedom Alive, Dr. Grossman.
It's great to be with you, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Now, Dr. Grossman, your first book on this particular topic was written a number of years ago, and it's You Want to Teach My Child What? How did you start to write about this issue of the LGBTQ issues with respect to children?
Well, yeah, the name of that book was You're Teaching My Child What? And it came out in 2009. And one of the reasons it's still so very relevant is because it was in that, doing the research for that book, that I discovered, to my astonishment, that kids were actually being taught that sex, male and female, is on a spectrum, that there are many different choices, many different options aside from male and female, that sex is assigned at birth as if it is some random decision that's made by a doctor or a nurse, and that it is completely normal and within the range of normal human experience to identify as something other than your biology. So I discovered that about 15 years ago, that kids were being taught that material. And as a child psychiatrist, an adolescent psychiatrist, understanding how important it is for our kids to have a strong and stable identity. Okay, you need that in order to be psychologically healthy. You need a strong identity. And here we were presenting these destabilizing ideas to them that have no basis in fact, what's in science whatsoever.
It used to be that we would use interchangeably the term sex or gender. If your gender, your sex, male or female, we thought of those terms in the same way. But Dr. John Money from New Zealand, who was at Johns Hopkins University, began to try to deconstruct or have two different labels, that sex is one thing and gender is another thing. How did that come about, and what's the impact that that has ultimately caused within this area that we're dealing with?
Well, what we're dealing with now in terms of all this epidemic of transgenderism could not have happened if it was not for Professor John Money, a distinguished psychologist, researcher, author from Johns Hopkins University. And he basically devoted his life to tearing down traditional values, Judeo-Christian values. And one of the things that he thought of was that male and female are purely social constructs, that they are not based in any biology. And this was back in the 50s. So to give him just a little bit of credit, what we knew back then about the human genome and about chromosomes and so on, his theory could have been valid. His theory that we are born neutral and that we could be raised as either male or female. That was his theory. And unfortunately, he succeeded in convincing his profession and most of the world, at least the Western world, that his theory was valid. And this idea that identity can be separate from biology is at the heart of today's transgender ideology. We are teaching kids this false idea that your biology does not matter. Mm-hmm. The truth is, if you try to deny your biology, you're going to pay a high price. And that is one of the main messages of my book, Lost in Trans Nation, a child psychiatrist's guide out of the madness. You have it there, I see. Mm-hmm. It's a guide for parents so that they can avoid the catastrophe of their child coming home one day and saying, "Mom, Dad, I'm not your son, I'm your daughter. I want you to call me by this girl's name, and I want puberty blockers to stop my development." That is a catastrophe. I have been helping these families and talking to hundreds of these families for the past few years. So I am in the trenches. And believe me, it is a nuclear bomb that you want to avoid at all costs.
Dr. Grossman, we can talk about Kinsey and his 1948, 1953 books and what he wanted to present in terms of human beings are sexual beings from birth in his Table 34 and John Money. But from a real standpoint that you're dealing with this now, This is the foundation that brought us to where we are now. But now you're dealing with this in real life. The consequences of Kinsey, the consequences of John Money, the consequences of separating sex from gender, that you can choose whatever birth, sex doesn't matter. Whatever you want to be. You can choose to be male or female, a combination of both or neither, pansexual, asexual, whatever it is. It's just so devastating. What are you seeing with regards to children and families? What's some of the examples that you're seeing, and how are you addressing these situations when parents come to you or children come to you with these confusions and these issues that they're dealing with?
So, yeah, I tell a lot of these stories in the book. Of course, they're kept anonymous, and they are, composite stories of different people that I've seen in my office. So what I see in my office is kids who are very confused and often deeply indoctrinated. And what I mean by indoctrinated is that they have heard these ideas so often, 24/7, from every, from friends, from school, from teachers, from guidance counselors, online, on YouTube, from their pediatrician, from our government authorities, you name it. They have heard these ideas 24/7 for years. Okay, so we have books for toddlers, books for preschoolers that tell these kids, you don't know if someone's a boy or a girl unless you ask them. They tell kids that you can be born with a girl's brain in a boy's body, and then you need to, align, quote unquote, your body with your mind. Again, no scientific basis for this whatsoever. What this does is it is destabilizing and confusing. And these kids who have heard it day in and day out, guess what? They believe it. They believe it. And so I have kids that are convinced that they will feel better. They might have anxiety, depression, autism, any number of issues. And they have been convinced that it's all because they're living in the wrong body. And that if they could only be put on testosterone and grow facial hair and their voices will be lowered, if only they could go on estrogen and they would have breasts, they feel that their issues are going to be resolved. So, I don't have the words to explain how bizarre and incorrect this is and how dangerous it is, because what happens is that if kids are put on this path and they are socially affirmed, which means calling them by a new name, using different pronouns, letting them use the opposite sex bathroom, etc., and on a daily moment-to-moment basis, this false identity is being reinforced.
Yeah, so this is a serious issue, and I want to talk about the pronouns in just a moment, because I want to ask you, in your opinion, how do parents deal with this, or friends or family members deal with this when somebody wants to be called by a different pronoun? But before we get to that, what you're talking about is kids have all kinds of stresses. They're talking about anxiety, depression. Some of it could be caused because they're somewhere on the autism spectrum, and they come into different kinds of stresses, confusion. It's a confused state of growing up at different stages. But then they realize, well, I've got all this confusion, I've got all this anxiety, people don't accept me. Maybe it's because I'm in the wrong body. And so instead of actually diagnosing or working with someone's real underlying issue, whether it's autism or something else, or a variety of anxiety issues or other stressors, then they're pushed down this path that this is the panacea. This is the way to resolve your problems. You can be someone else, because the problem is that you're not a boy. You can be a girl. You can be whatever you want to be. That's a very dangerous ideology. It's a very dangerous practice. And yet, Dr. Grossman, much of the psychiatric and psychological organizations and even practitioners have fallen into this trap of being part of the problem rather than part of the solution.
That is absolutely correct. And that's why I am telling parents not to take your child to a gender affirming clinic. Because if you do that, your child will be placed in the driver's seat. You will be told to get into the back seat. You will be told that your child knows who they are better than you do, and your child knows what's going to be good for them better than you do. In other words, they're going to tell you to disregard your gut instinct. Now, an overriding message of my book is to go for parents, is to trust their instinct. What do I do with patients? It's very simple. I do with them what I would do with any patient who has symptoms, who has some kind of psychiatric symptom, and that is that first I get to know them. I'm very curious. I want to know all about their lives. I want to know about their families, about school, about friends, about things they've gone through. Have they been traumatized in some way? Because I'll tell you what, when someone decides that they want a new identity, they're running away from something. And you have to figure out, what is it that they are running from? Why do they not want to grow into a woman? Do they think they're going to be sexually assaulted? Do they think they're just going to be, a sexual object? Are they trying to express, do they think that women are weak? And why would a man be running away from his masculinity? These are the kind of questions that you need to ask. And the parents need to understand that there is not one way, and the kid also needs to understand, there isn't one way to be a man. There isn't one way to be a woman. There are many different kinds of women and men, and that people can find their way amongst all those possibilities. They can find their identity without harming their bodies and without becoming sterile. For goodness sake, these are terrible things that are happening.
Yeah. So now a child comes home, and it may be that in the schools, what you're seeing this, I'm sure, because we're seeing it as well, the schools are hiding from the parents what they're telling these children. And so you actually have it in your book that you can have one name, that's your real name, that's your name at home, but when you go to school, instead of being Paul, you're Patty. And they give you a different pronoun at school, and they hide that from your parents. So this can go on for a period of time. Now, one day, your child comes home, and they want to be called Patty instead of Paul. They want to have the pronouns of she, her, rather than he, him, for example. What counsel would you give to a parent to do that? Because the child can be very pushy if you're just not accepting me, if you don't call me by this name. That's who I am. And they might want to even shut off communication. And the parent has a lot of pressure to decide, what do they do? What do they do in a situation like that?
That's correct. And I have talked to hundreds of parents who have been in that situation. And in fact, my book includes the results of a survey that I did of 500 parents from 17 different countries, providing their advice to parents on exactly this issue. How do you talk to your child? How do you deal with the school? How do you deal with your child's internet use? And so on and so forth. I provide a model conversation between parent and child when the child has come to you and said, I am not your son, I'm your daughter. I want to be called by this name and these pronouns. So I have an entire model conversation of how a parent must remain loving, but at the same time, be able to draw the line. It's a difficult tightrope, but it can be done. Basically, the parent is going to say, I want to know more about this. I see that it's important to you. Can you please explain to me more what this is all about? Because I see how important it is to you, I am going to go out and learn all I can about this. But right now, we're not going to make those changes.
That's very good counsel. So on the one hand, the parent shouldn't say, okay, I'm going to go along with this fiction, and I'm going to call you something that you're not. On the other hand, the parent shouldn't say, that's ridiculous, I'm not going to do that. But the parent should be engaging and inquisitive and understanding, but still not ultimately could, cave into calling something that's really not reality.
Well, of course, the parent wants to represent reality because emotionally healthy people live in reality, even when that reality is painful. So yes, the parent has to be the parent living in reality, but that doesn't mean that you are not curious and patient and loving. Your child is in distress. You have to understand your child is in distress and wants your approval. And it's important for you to know that that child is not alone and that you're there for your child. You might disagree on this. You're going to do the research. It's going to be a long, it's not one conversation. It's many conversations. But you don't want your child to feel like they are isolated and that they need support outside the home. That is what you do not want, because I promise you, there are many people that are eagerly waiting to take your role away.
Yeah, that's a good counsel, because it goes back to what you say that you do in the counseling session. You want to be curious. You want to learn about this child. You want to learn all these different aspects of the child's life, the parent's life, if you're talking to an adult as well, or the parent of the child. And if the parent just puts up a wall and says, I'm not going to play along with this, they may never know about why this child is to this position. They may not know about what's happening in the schools. They may not know that the child might have been, for example, sexually assaulted or whatever it might be, a whole myriad of things. So this gives the parent that opportunity to explore and understand the child and help then lead the child in a healthy direction.
Now, Matt, I'm not saying that that's an easy conversation to have. And there are moments when parents feel like they are just losing their minds. I tell stories about parents who, their kids say things that are so outrageous that, like, one mother told me that she was just biting her tongue so hard that it started to bleed because her kid was saying outrageous things, such as, for example, this was, a girl saying that she's a boy, and then her boyfriend is another girl that thinks she's a boy, and we're a gay couple.
Wow.
These are the kind of things that kids are being led to believe by these ideologues. And that's why parents have to be aware that all this is happening and I'm giving them advice. I put my heart and soul into this book, Matt, so that there will not be more families that are turning to therapists like myself and are, just desperate for help. I want this to end. I don't want any more kids and families being destroyed by this.
In terms of schools, we're seeing an increase because of the pressure that these kids are being put under and this false ideology, this gender ideology that's being put forth. I saw a recent information from the Montgomery, Maryland school district that said over the past several years, I think since 2019, gender non-conforming students in that school, Maryland's largest school district, increased during that time period by 586%. Well, you look at what they're doing in that school, and they're pushing this whole gender ideology. These kids are being bombarded with it, whether they're in private school, public school, whether they're in their community. It's everywhere. It's very pervasive, as you said earlier in the program.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I also have information for parents on how to be proactive at the schools. You have constitutional rights as a parent to be in charge of your child's education and upbringing. I have an appendix written by lawyers that give you ways to be proactive with your school. Don't wait until the problem happens. You have to, even if your kid is just entering kindergarten, I want you to see the form that I have there in the book that you can present to the school in terms of what your family's wishes are and what your family's demands are about your child.
Thank you, Dr. Grossman, for being our guest. Again, your book is Lost in Transnation. You can get that on Amazon.com. Make sure you get the hard copy version, but you can also go directly to your website, MiriamGrossmanMD.com. That's MiriamGrossmanMD.com.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you.
Matt, I'm thankful for this story of truth, really, that Dr. Grossman brings us from the absolute front line of this unrelenting assault on our kids. I mean, there's no other way to say it. As parents and grandparents, we're at war.
Yeah, this is a war over our children, and it's been a war that's been in the making for decades. And you go back to the 1948 book by Alfred Kinsey, Sexuality in the Human Male, and then the 1953 book by the same author, Dr. Kinsey, Sexuality in the Human Female. And that's really what began what we see now with this gender ideology, because he wanted to lay the foundation to destroy the very notion that there is a God. And the best way to do that is to destroy morality, and to destroy morality by having human sexuality with no confines, no moral compass. And Dr. Money came out of that time frame, and he adopted Kinseyism and separated the so-called sex from gender in terms of one being just a construct of your mind and the other being biology, and that the two don't have any connection together. That ideology really begins the first chapter of her book. Where did this begin? And she begins with Dr. John Money. And that really teaching that notion to kids that they are whoever they want to be in terms of their gender, their sex, that they can change from male to female, neither, both, or a combination of who knows how many different variants, just like they change their clothes or their hair color if they want to. That's a very dangerous ideology. And what it ultimately does is it destroys kids. And for what's happening in the counseling realm, kids that are really struggling with real issues, whether they're on the autism spectrum, whether they're having anxiety, self-deprecation, self-mutilation, other kinds of things that are happening with depression, those kinds of issues are being unresolved, and instead people are being fast-tracked down this very dangerous gender ideology. And as she says, you know, it's sterilizing our children. It's killing the current generation of children.
We are thankful to bring you guests like Dr. Grossman week after week on Freedom Alive. We constantly speak about it, but the goal of every episode is to bring hope, peace, light, and truth. And what a story of truth from the very front line of this issue. But God is for us. He is absolutely for us. He loves your kids. He loves you. Well, in closing, remember Galatians 5, verse 1, which says, "It was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery." Our freedom is a gift from our Creator. We must never forget that and always protect it. So join us here next time, where you'll hear victories as well as ways you can stand up for your priceless freedom. Join us again for Freedom Alive.